So next we want to bring up a group of folks who work directly in or with the public sector who have successfully acted on some of the policies that Dr. McAfee just mentioned, right? To lead this next panel, I would like to introduce Ben Lewis, Special Assistant to the CEO at Purpose Built Communities. Ben is serving with Purpose Built through a residency as part of his doctoral program in educational leadership at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Prior to this role, Ben served as a principal, assistant principal, English teacher, track coach, and after-school program coordinator in Denver and Philadelphia. Ben also supports our work, overachiever, right? Ben also supports our work at the Julius Wilson Institute as a consultant. So please welcome Ben to the stage.
So if you know Hailing Price, you will know that I am not him. Hailing Price was initially scheduled to moderate this panel. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to come due to a very mild case of COVID. So I also wanted to let you know that Marge Turner was initially going to join us as well, Institute fellow at the Urban Institute, also unable to join us. But we have a wonderful panel ahead of you today to talk about the public sector. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists for today. To my left, Mayor Michael Nutter. As mayor of Philadelphia from 2008 to 2016, Michael Nutter led the city to improve its credit rating to an A, reduce homicides to an almost 50-year low, and significantly improve high school graduation and college degree attainment rates. In addition to serving as professor and advisor and commentator on CNN, Mayor Nutter has been a champion of and advocate for neighborhood-focused, place-based work. Welcome, Mayor Nutter. I'd also like to welcome County Executive of Dutchess County, Marcus Molinaro. After serving as mayor, county representative, and on the state legislature in New York, Mark Molinaro was elected as Dutchess County's 7th county executive. Youngest.
Ain't nobody asked for all that commentary, man.
As county executive, he is leading a holistic approach to dealing with residents' health and is leading the Path to Promise, a multi-year effort to ensure all young people in Dutchess County from birth to age 19 have the assets they need to achieve their fullest potential as they grow into young adults. Welcome, Executive Molinaro. And lastly, I'd like to welcome Jim Shelton. Jim currently serves as the Chief Impact and Investment Officer at Meridian Partners. A longtime leader in this field, was also President of Education for the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, President and Chief Impact Officer at 2U, and Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Education, where he founded and served as the Executive Director of My Brother's Keeper and oversaw the Promise Neighborhoods program. Welcome to the stage, Jim. So, as I said before, the focus of this panel is on the public sector. We heard some points today about how the public sector is involved in place-based work. Alan Cohen told us to adopt a bureaucrat. We also heard about the Children's Cabinet model from Rob Watson. So whether folks in the public sector are leading, supporting, or otherwise contributing to, we know that various levels of government can have a huge impact in moving place-based work forward. And I'm excited to talk about the way that these three individuals have done that in their various roles. So my first question is really why? You could be anywhere in the world, but you are here with us today at the Power of Place convening. And my question is why? What is it about place-based work that drives you and inspires you? Mayor Nutter, we start with you.
Jeff Canada told me I need to get my ass down here, so I mean, the why? Jeff is like E.F. Hutton. No, I'm excited to be here. Jeff, thank you seriously for the invitation to be here, and thoughts go out to Hailing. What I'm really upset about is I don't understand why I have to go after Michael McAfee. I mean, that's just wrong. That's just wrong. Give it up for Michael one more time. That was some serious. I'm a public servant. I mean, that's what I do. It's who I am. And I've been blessed. I've been fortunate, and I have debts to pay for all the things that folks have done for me in Philadelphia. And whether it's, kind of West Philadelphia, born and raised, I'm actually older than him. Keep my hands to myself. But don't worry about it, Marcus. It's okay. I told Jeff it's going to be outrageous. No, it is all about place, and it is about the power of place, and place matters. And what we do with resources, I've told folks for decades, budgets are more than numbers and words on a sheet of paper. It's the articulation of your values and what you're committed to. And what you want to do with those resources makes all the difference in the world. You can change people's lives, especially at the local level. It's on the ground, day to day. That's why I'm here.
Thank you. Executive Molinaro.
Jeff Canada said I should get my ass down here. When the mayor says it, it sounds better than when I say it.
Yeah,
but
you should let that go.
I'm gonna stick with my upstate New York jokes. I come from a small place in northwest Dutchess County in upstate New York. A woman spent some time there as a child, Eleanor Roosevelt, and she spoke about where major human rights change begins. And she said it begins in the small places. And what I will tell you, to carry on where the mayor left off, we can change policy. You can pick and choose any elected official you want, but real change occurs at home. It's where people live, it's where they see the change, and by the way, it's where they see the pain and the challenge. What we're doing in Dutchess County with our friends in the city of Poughkeepsie is critically important. We're building, and hopefully a model. You mentioned Path to Promise. I'm here because we dare to dream big, but recognize that the change we hope to make has to happen in the neighborhood, at the block level, and in the home. And if it doesn't, we'll have great policies, but no outcomes. We'll be able to make investment without necessarily creating opportunity. And so for us, whether it's my friend, the mayor of the city of Poughkeepsie, or the county leader, I'm here because we've got to build the coalition at the local level to make the change at the local level. And little by little, in those small places, that's where big change happens.
Thank you, Secretary Molinaro. Jim?
Sure, I'm here for three quick reasons. One is I grew up in Southeast DC, and I would have been one of those kids who was standing up at the panel, at the mic, telling my story, knowing that there were many of my friends who were smarter than I was, more motivated than I was, harder worker than I was, and it shouldn't be that way. Number two is that everybody here now knows the Raj Chetty data. You know the Raj Chetty data? He's a Harvard economist. He said, look, if it's not within a half mile of your house, then opportunity doesn't really impact your life trajectory. So the data says very clearly, whether you're in a high growth city, a low growth city, a rural community, if you can't line up opportunity where people live and work, then it really doesn't matter. And the third is, we've been at this for too long. Like, philanthropy's invested billions, government's invested trillions, and yet we have not put together the approach to systematically reach each and all the children, every one of the 11 plus million, and give them the promise that we made. And so that's just not acceptable. And as these two gentlemen, who both may not be older than me, but we'll leave that alone.
You know I'm older than you.
I am definitely not.
Oh, I mean, the only person older than me is Jeff. I mean, you know I'm older than you. Come on now. Like, come on. Why you play me like that?
Sorry. The reality is, no matter what we do, it has to happen on the ground. And that's where place is.
Thanks, Jim. I think one of the through lines was the emphasis on the hyperlocal. Where do people live is what we need to focus on. Jim, can you talk a little bit more about why a Cradle-to-Career pipeline needs to be in a neighborhood? What is it about that?
Sure. So I talked a little bit about this, about the half-mile radius that people actually know a lot about. But one of the things I want to highlight is part of the reason that people have worked so hard at this for a long time, and yet we've not seen the progress is oftentimes people are like, oh, Cradle-to-Career, we're doing it. And you're like, okay, great, tell me about it. You're like, Look at this great early learning center over here. Look at this great elementary school over here. We've got a great high school over here. I'm like, well, what child gets to experience all of those? Like, where's the pathway for an individual child for them to be able to navigate from their place where the odds are saying that they're not going to make it to a place that they definitely have made it? And if that's not showing up in a way that is clear and accessible and seamless for them, what are the odds that they're going to figure out how to navigate it on their own? So if you don't put it in their neighborhoods, if you don't make it accessible, if you don't make it so that the pieces fit together, I'm not sure you're actually doing the work. And it's not like that other work is not important. It's just not sufficient. So, yes, we need to create great ones of everything, and then we have to line them up in the neighborhoods where people live so they can access them every single time they need it. Just that simple.
Executive Molinaro, you really put a stake in the ground around we need Cradle-to-Career in Dutchess County.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the Path to Promise program and the Youth Center and how you're working to build that pipeline?
Sure. I'll start with the Youth Center. So our Youth Opportunity Union is to be a state-of-the-art, modern, one-stop shop. Why are we in the neighborhood? Because that's where the cradle is. And if the opportunity is outside the neighborhood, there's the only thing that you might have is hope, but not necessarily the ability to achieve the opportunity. So we've got to be where people need us to be. And to that point, I would articulate the reason that we're committed to a one-stop shop, right? Youth Opportunity Union, collaboration between the public health, the private health, education, local community leaders, job preparation, investing in one place is because young people, if they're going to be on a path to success, can't have multiple directions they need to move in. The other is, listen, I'm a local elected official in New York, county level government. We're responsible for social services, mental health services. That's our job. It is more efficient, it is more effective, and it is less expensive with better results to put it all under one roof and then get people working together. The other I'll say to you is that every kid in a suburban to rural community like ours faces different challenges. There is little question that the challenge in our urban communities, black and brown kids, have a greater and steeper challenge to accessing good quality healthcare, good quality education. That's a realization of multiple problems of levels and policies. But we still see problems and challenges for young people in the rural settings where they can't get to some services, or there is heightened poverty. It might be small community, small numbers, but it's extreme. And so our belief in Dutchess was every kid deserves the opportunity to achieve success. Now that sounds really flowery and without the ability to measure anything. I could say that and probably get elected a lot, but if you wanted to check to see if we were successful, we wouldn't have any measurement to prove it. Path to Promise matches the desire to create opportunity for young people, whether they're in the city of Poughkeepsie or in the little urban, rural village of Tivoli. The need to create that opportunity, but then the tools, the development stages along the way, and then the measurements to prove that we're successful. Maybe it's nutrition, maybe it's tardiness in school, maybe it is parents accessing jobs. And so by measuring the success and creating support between each developmental stage, our Path to Promise is meant to identify kids who might be at risk early. Maybe they're doing fine those first two developmental stages, but that third one, we missed. And therefore, identifying those kids that are dealing with risk, intervening at the right moment, we hopefully can achieve greater development, greater opportunity. Creating a single place for all of that to happen, obviously, as I said, putting it in a neighborhood makes sense, right? We need it close to where people are, but it also creates the synergies. And we're working with the largest not-for-profit architectural firm in the world who understands social equity, married with the school district, which has struggled for years, with the local government, who has limited resources, and of course the county government, which has less than limited resources. That's why the mayor likes to have me around. I signed the check. But my point is, by marrying all of that under one roof, it creates the synergy necessary to experiment and export good ideas into the neighborhoods and the communities that need them. And that's why we're so committed to it.
It's really inspiring, Executive Molinaro. Thank you.
You bet.
Mayor Nutt, I want to turn to you next. Before I do that, I just want to share briefly The last time I was in the same room as Mayor Nutter was 2007, and it was on 15th and Chestnut in the Michael Nutter for Mayor office. I showed up there and asked for a stack of papers that I could drop off at people's houses and tell them that they should vote for Mayor Nutter and why. I was inspired by what he was saying then. I lived in Philadelphia throughout his tenure as mayor. And let me share with you that the numbers that I shared in his bio, he really is the driver behind that. It didn't happen by accident. One of the things I've heard you speak about, Mayor Nutter, is about the courage it takes to focus on neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. You know, I'd served on Philadelphia City Council for 14 and a half years. I like to think that I was a bit of a student of government. I think most people would say I was, you know, in the five-way race for mayor in 2007, I was kind of the nerd, policy wonk candidate, but I had city government experience. And Ed Rendell, a great mayor, was always considered the downtown mayor, even though he did a ton of stuff in neighborhoods. John Street, who came after him, was considered the neighborhoods mayor, even though he did a ton of stuff in Center City. But, you know, it's all about the narrative and the press. And I just thought that neither of them ever first got the credit for the other things that they did. And I was committed to really trying to do both. But there are choices. You know, we, unlike the feds, I mean, you know, we don't print the money in the basement. We get what we get either from the taxpayers or the state or, I mean, we're a city and a county or the federal government. And so, you know, we're always, you know, scraping, you know, 2 nickels together and trying to make a quarter out of it. When the, you know, promised neighborhoods and choice neighborhood grants come from the federal government, and I mean, I had 7 of my 8 years in office were with, you know, during the time of President Obama. We had to make some decisions, and you know, everybody can make a great case, and there's so much need out there, but we decided to literally put, you know, I don't play cards, but I've seen it on TV. We put all of our chips in the 22nd Police District, which is the most violent police district in the city, highest levels of poverty. Every bad measurement, they're at or near the top, and every good measurement, they're pretty much at or near the bottom. And we decided that we were going to place our bet on that community. There's a lot of pressure, a lot of politics, a lot of personality that goes into that decision. And that was my decision to make as the chief executive officer. You have to say no to some folks, and you actually have to hurt some people's feelings from time to time. If you have a need to be loved and admired, this is not the job for you. You should go work in a pet shop or something. So, you know, but we use data. So, you know, one of the experts in this work is here with us today. Of course, Michelle Jolan and Results for America, and you know, and Jen Park, who oversees you know, the data certification for cities. You have to use the data to help you make the case as to why this neighborhood and not that neighborhood. That doesn't mean I don't love you, but we're making this bet here. We're making this decision. Why, and the outcomes that we're trying to have. And you have to be willing to stand up to the public, to the press, to the activists, to everyone, and say, this is what we're doing, this is why, these are our expectations, and we're driving this particular agenda for these reasons. And you are not going to be universally loved, and somebody's always going to be pissed off. That's just the way it goes. It was not, I took the position, it is not my job to make you happy. It's my job to make sure that you're safe. It's my job to make sure your kids can get an education. It's my job to make sure you can walk down the street and not be shot. It's, you know, and that there's economic opportunity in your community. You don't have to run all over the place to do things. And if you shepherd those resources and marshal those resources and put every possible resource into a community, you, at the local level, you can change people's lives. And that's what I wanted to do. And that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Mayor Nutter. One of the things that's come up in conversations a little bit today is this idea of civic infrastructure and thinking about what organizations exist on the ground and thinking about your various roles in government. What kind of civic infrastructure would you say needs to be there in your level of government for you to really drive forward on the goals that you're trying to accomplish? Jim, can we start with you?
So one of the things that's been powerful about watching the work that many of the communities that we've had the chance to support this year, last couple of years, has been realizing that they are holding the frame. They are naming the importance of Cradle-to-Career. They are convening lots of people, but the way that the work gets done is actually all the members of the partnership. The school system has to show up. The Child and Family Services Office has to show up. The mayor has to lean in. And when that doesn't happen, the organization that's trying to hold the frame finds themselves holding it on their own, fighting sometimes even with the folks who have most resources to get it done. And so that civic infrastructure has to begin with someone who's willing to lead and hold the vision, and then enlist others in the vision, as you heard earlier. And then it actually takes almost every actor to be able to hold it long enough and put the pieces together that we talked about for it to actually work. And so let me say two more things about this. Oftentimes when we talk about the neighborhood, we act as though it's somehow disconnected from the broader community. And the reality is, I want to link together three things that you heard earlier today. You heard Lester Young say, you can't have excellence unless you have equity. So as long as a city has those neighborhoods that are lagging behind, it's actually not that great a city. And those neighborhoods are dragging down as good as it could be in every other place in the city. The second thing is, you actually heard Michael say, hey, look, it is about each and all the kids. And you heard Alan say, hey, sometimes the unit of change is at the child level, sometimes it's at the school level, sometimes it's at the neighborhood level. And the reality is every single one of those levels has to have its own body of folks that are coming together to drive their specific set of goals around that child or that school or that neighborhood. But in the end, it all has to come back together. And that's what makes this so hard. I mean, you guys are living it. That's what makes it hard, but that's the only way it's going to work.
Thank you, Jim. Executive Molinaro, I'm going to ask you the same question, and then I want to open it up to the audience and get some folks in the conversation if you have a question. So, Executive Molinaro.
Well, so I will say from let me get to like a really practical government level. If you're engaged in the community and your organization wants to make a difference and you want to be good at everything, don't waste my time. I want you to be great at the thing and the mission that you have. The goal of Path to Promise and the Youth Opportunity Union, in order to get those civic institutions functioning well, we had to say two very important things. Your ego is the least important thing to me. My ego is important, but your ego is really unimportant. And then with that, we're going to have to accept failure, so we risk, and we're not blaming people, and we're not going to point fingers at one another. We're just going to try to the next thing. So your ego is least important. And if you are involved in changing kids' lives in a preschool setting, I don't need you focused on what they do after school. I don't need you focused on what they do after high school. Mission creep of not-for-profit and social institutions become this desire to just assume and consume more money. I want you to be great. And what we did in our effort was to find the best, a collaboration, the best in every one of those stages of development, those who need to fill those gaps, and who are the ones that bring less ego, more resource to the table, and are focused on achieving success. If you are there and willing to measure it, that is the kind of social civic infrastructure that I need and we need as a community to be successful. And I will say to the politicians, whether you're in the room or someplace else, it is true that your ego is the least important. I will get the success I need and the credit for all the good things that happen, and I will get outsized blame for the bad things that happen. Get over it and let the experts engage around the table in delivering a result that we measure and see. And when you use the data, prove that we can be successful. That's the civic infrastructure I need.
Thanks, Executive Molinaro. I think many of us can relate to avoiding mission creep as folks that are leading nonprofits. So we want to invite you all into the conversation. We have a few folks who are going to be running mics. So if you have a question, raise your hand and they'll come and bring you a mic. And when you ask your question, please say your name, the organization that you're coming from, say your question first, and then give the context after that. You'll get more generative answers that way. That's fun. All right, questions?
My name is Brandon Oldham. I'm here from Tulsa, Oklahoma with the George Kaiser Family Foundation. And my question is, how can we lean in and continue to move the needle regardless of who's sitting in the seat as mayor or the political affiliations? If there's any insight there, and the context to it is, I live in Oklahoma, and I'll just leave it there. But furthermore, as we all continue to have the conversations, I was really inspired by what Dr. McAfee said there, regardless of the Republicans or Democrats are saying the same thing. And so just wanted to have any insights from you all.
Communities, at the end of the day, are often the best entities to institutionalize change. The public has to make certain demands. Electeds, for the most part, respond to those demands. But, most of these problems are not going to be changed in a 2, 4, or 6 year cycle, right? So it is helpful at the time you're doing what you're doing to get that person, whoever's sitting in that seat right now, to buy into that. But ultimately, you need to institutionalize that change within the government such that whoever the next person is, all they can do is build on it, but not get rid of it. And the public has to hold us accountable. See, people think, hey, I went to the polls, I went, the primary and the general, whatever. You can't leave us alone for the other 363 days a year, right? I mean, the job's not done. I mean, if somebody came to your house, you told them to paint your house and they only did half of it, the job's not finished, right? You hire us to do certain things. You have to hold us accountable. Polling place is one thing. The other 363 is the other part of the job, right? And so, and if people are not doing the job, then you have to call them out. You're not doing your job. You're not doing what we asked you to do. You hired somebody to make certain decisions and put certain things in place. And if they're not, then like somebody painting your house, fixing your car, mowing your lawn, if they're not doing the job, you're going to speak to them on that because you're paying them. Well, you pay us to do certain things. Hold us accountable.
Can I also say, first, to the mayor's point, work with whoever's there. Waiting for the next person means you're waiting for the next person. And by the way, also giving that person that's in the office the ability to ignore you until the next person shows up. Not only hold us accountable for the things we don't do, but celebrate the things we do. And what I would say to you is that, and I see it often, we are very quick to stand with the people we agree with at the moments we agree with them, and we are not willing to stand with the people we don't agree with in the moments we agree with them. And we have to be able to do that as well. Because there are risks that elected officials at times are willing to take, whether you agree with them all the time or not. If they're standing with you to take that risk with you, be there with them in the positive moments, but then hold them accountable in those negative moments. Don't let us lose sight. But don't let opportunity to build relationship, support for the good things go by. We're simple creatures, elected officials, very simple creatures. You pat us on the head, we feel good. You kick us in the ass, we feel bad. You can do both of those things, but please do both of those things. And to the point at the local level, I get back to work with anyone who's honest and earnest about trying to solve the problem. Whether they go to a different church than you, whether they grew up someplace, whether they look different than you, work with anyone who's honest and earnest about trying to get to a solution and set aside those other things that you want to argue about later and focus on that. You build the institutional support that will sustain elected officials and go beyond the elected officials, and that's important too.
I'll just say the only thing I have to add is the stuff I've learned from you, which is for those of you that have already built community trust, the people who want to run know they need to come see you. Right. If you aren't in a position where you have the people who are running for your mayor, your county commissioner come see you, Talk to your folks who are around the room. Many of them do. Yeah, that's for sure. The second thing I'll say is that we have a unique opportunity right now, which is the money from the infrastructure bill and other things is going to get spent over a decade. Right. So whatever shows up in those plans today, people aren't going to be able to change 5 years from now. I don't know how many of you are paying close attention to what infrastructure is getting built to connect the neighborhood you care about to the employment centers in your community, or to support the housing development in your community. But those plans, those citywide plans, is also one of the ways that we get from having to choose, oh, we're going to do one neighborhood, to let's lay out the 2-decade plan that says how we're going to get to all the neighborhoods. And we have a unique opportunity to do that right now.
Can I just add to that one thing? Urban renewal did not happen overnight. It was a 50-year effort to destroy downtowns. I live in a place in the city of Poughkeepsie where poor black people were ignored so that highways could be built. It is a mark on all of us, but it didn't happen overnight. They planned and planned and planned, and then 50 years, when the money finally showed up, they were able to move these massive highways into places that destroyed cities and city centers. We've been correcting it ever since. The infrastructure dollars, I'd be lucky if we spend it over the next decade. It'll get spent over the next 10 to 20 years, but right now, somebody has already got a plan for your neighborhood, and you need to know what it is. And then you need to say to them, we need to review that. And then build the infrastructure to manage, monitor, and then hopefully change that kind of community-based investment so that it benefits everyone, not just a few.
We have a little saying back home, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Yeah, fair enough.
You want to be at the table.
All right. Thanks for that first question. Anyone else in the back?
Hi, I'm Sadiqa Reynolds from the Louisville Urban League, and I wonder about the role of philanthropy as it relates to government and in pushing on policy. So, for example, in our city, we are saying to government first, do not build any housing, do not put $1 of our tax dollars into any housing that does not include affordable housing. We're also pushing on philanthropy to do the same. Don't drop any money anywhere that doesn't include affordable housing. But I wonder about, can philanthropy do more, or what is your perspective on the role of philanthropy within government as it relates to policies, and any ideas we have around how that relationship could push for real change much faster?
So I have a couple thoughts about that. Dealt with a lot of foundations and philanthropic organizations. You know, I was a Great Recession mayor, so a lot of dependence, a lot of relationship on public-private partnerships, and just trying to get stuff done with philanthropic efforts. I continue to say a couple things about philanthropy. First of all, could we just, with all respect, could we just stop with the 3-year grant? It takes the government a year and a half to figure out what to do with a 3-year grant. So, right? I mean, sorry, Jeff. I mean, the shit is almost over by the time we figure out what to do with the money, right? So stop with the 3-year grant, right? How about a 10-year grant? How about a 10-year, right? I mean, really invest, right? I mean, like what are you talking about, right? So that's one. But I think the philanthropic community leaves so much political capital on the table, slides onto the floor, goes down the drain. They could have so much influence and power if they decide to utilize it. So for instance, if you put a whole bunch of bucks, so, in a lot of places, it's either, like in Philly, you got 2-term limit. You come, you go, you leave, next person, right? Other places, 2 terms, 3 terms, get defeated, get indicted, die, leave, whatever, right? Right. I mean, Boston and Chicago, stay forever, right? So whatever. But for the most part, right? If you do a 10-year piece with criteria and sign up, and then I show up as the new person, and we're 6 years into the 10-year grant, It's not like I'm sending the money back. I'm going to do the thing because we committed to that, right? So use that power of accountability and money and resource that you have already put in. No one is ever sending a dime back. That's how you institutionalize change. But, you know, you hear sometimes from philanthropic, well, we don't want to get that involved. We don't want to tell them what to do. You gave them the money. You already told them what to do. What are you talking about, right? So stop with that. And so I just think that philanthropy can play a role, have impact, and really, because the electeds come and go. The foundation's not going anywhere. They don't move, they don't go out of business, they don't run out of money, right? They're going to be around. So when you make that investment, make it for the long term, and then drive accountability and success. Use the power of your position.
What he said. There's a little question. Listen, government does everything. It takes a long time for government to do it. We do it in short increments, and yes, politicians come and go. We're like, bums, just in office for a period of time, and away we go. Philanthropic organization.
Did you say that?
We're bums. We're bums.
I mean, we're going to have to fight. Right?
We are temporary stewards without a home, and when we're done, it's your house.
That sounded so much better.
Fair enough. It's just I'm just a poor white kid from upstate New York. I was trying.
I don't know what Dutchess County is. Okay.
Longer term commitment. You can bend the arc of government, move it to commit more long term, and politicians don't turn it over. What I will also say is, they once asked the great bank robber Willie Sutton why he robbed banks, because that's where the money is. So I'm going to tell you something about politicians. Why do they show up where the philanthropic organizations are? Because where the money is. Use that to leverage outcomes.
So obviously I'd be silly to disagree with anything that was said. But here's the two or three things I will actually focus on. One is definitely philanthropy can do a lot more than it does today. And it shows up in a number of different ways. But before I talk about that, I want to say it really doesn't make any sense. Like, if you think about the amount of money that I have to bring to the table, even if I piled all of our money in one city compared to a city's budget, why would we have any influence at all? Like, when I put money into a grant of $5 million in a city, what's your budget in Poughkeepsie?
My budget's $550 million.
Yeah, what's the Philadelphia budget?
5.1 billion.
Yeah, so when I make a $5 million a year grant, $25 million grant to a city over 5 years, let's make it 50 over 10. Compared to the resources that are already there, it's crazy that what I think should matter a whole lot. Now, that doesn't matter because the reality is, for some reason, it does. So here's what I'll say. Philanthropy can do, back to three things very differently than it does today. Number one is stop being scared, as Michael said. Lots of people use the excuse of the nonprofit status to stay out of things that actually are very clearly within their scope. You can fund organizations to do advocacy work. You can fund organizations that do your work to do better advocacy. You can support the organizing work that needs to happen in communities to actually bring pressure on the things that matter. There's a lot of things that philanthropy can do that it actually stands back from because it's afraid to lean in, and it uses the C3 status as an excuse. The second thing is that philanthropy actually needs to get behind the people who are unafraid. So a lot of times, in order to be balanced, you wind up defeating your own purpose. And so the reality is that, sure, you may need to remain in some ways balanced, but your issue is your issue, your result is your result. Whoever it is that cares about that result, you need to be willing to get behind them. And the reality is, no one is with you all the time. So philanthropy has to be willing to go after the issues that they care about with the people who are going to carry the water even if they're on things that they don't agree with even if they're with people that they don't agree with all the time. And I will once again say that myself included over the years, comes back to fear. I'm supporting you on this issue, and then you go out there and say X, and you're in the paper, and so are we, right? I believe we're at a place where we don't have time for that. And the third and last thing I'll say is philanthropy needs to be willing to use all the tools in the drawer. And this is not as much the case for folks who are working with traditional foundations where they've got their endowment and so forth, so on. But there's a lot of living donors out there working and doing philanthropic work. And the reality is for them, like, all the tools ought to be on the table. C3 work, C4 work. Most of them, when they get to levels of having hundreds of millions in their state or billions at their national, they can pick up the phone and talk to anybody they want and have whatever influence they want.
Absolutely.
And they do it on any other issue but these.
Yeah.
And so I think it's time for folks who have that kind of access and influence to pick up the phone, cut the check, do just like they would do to advance their business, to advance the cause they say they care so much about. That's what philanthropy can do that's very different than what it does today.
And just one last piece to further the point of the lady who asked the question. If you spend any time in Philadelphia last few years, if you're on the Delaware waterfront, notwithstanding what the city has put in or the state, the entity that has driven the greatest amount of change on the Delaware waterfront in Philadelphia is the William Penn Foundation. And they didn't pay for everything, and they weren't the biggest contributor, but they've been the most consistent. They've been focused. They have helped drive change to our waterfront, trails, bike paths, keeping buildings off of most of the waterfront, but they've been a consistent partner, and we could always depend on them. And that waterfront will be what it is because of a particular foundation taking a role and being a consistent partner. And I mean, that's just a reality. And you can replicate that model all across the United States of America. But the William Penn Foundation has been that for us in Philadelphia through my time, through my successor, previous to me. And I mean, it's so powerful. And they don't have to put all the money in, but they're a driver and they can rally other support.
Thank you. And thank you, Sadiqa, for that generative question. That's something that's on a lot of our minds, is how do we fund this work? We heard from Jeff Canada that the answer to that question is becoming easier, considering the unprecedented amount of federal funds that are now available. Later on today, we're going to have a conversation about combining public and private funds to accelerate this work, as we talk about how you braid those and how you leverage one source of funding for another. I'm going to share a quick point of logistics, and I'm going to close out the panel. We're going to break for 10 minutes, and we're going to reconvene at 2:30. Just wanted to share that. But before you all get out of your seats and do whatever you need to do, I just wanted to thank our panelists. I'll share a quick word. I told you my quick story about Mayor Nutter, about where I came across him. What's really inspiring is, I'm not going to foray into any of the age jokes, but what I will say is that he's still doing this work now. He was doing it then, and he's still up here on the stage doing this work now. That's really inspiring for me. Executive Molinaro,
I got to say some more, or I mean, is that it? It's
inspiring was the key word.
I'm old and I showed up, and that's the. Is that the end result of that story? He's still around. Damn.
Could be worse.
So glad I came.
Yeah, take away the inspiration. That's what I'm taking away. Executive Molinaro, you really put a stake in the ground about really investing in youth and families, not only in how you have developed your administration, but also in the programming you set up through Path to Promise and the Youth Center. That's really exciting and really inspiring as well. As you all heard in my bio, I'm a graduate student, and I read a lot about Promised Neighborhoods and My Brother's Keeper and Blue Meridian, and you think about, what do these things have in common? Jim Shelton. We have Jim Shelton up here leading the way, being on the front end of this work in so many ways. So it's really exciting to hear him share his wisdom with us. So I want to thank all of our panelists today.